so much for coming to our session on the Hong Kong protests and hope. President Xi Jinping started this year by pronouncing that it would be the year of Chinese reunification. He was wrong. He also assumed that he would be able to subsume Hong Kong with an extradition law subjecting anybody in Hong Kong to rendition to the mainland's court system. This has been a surprise, so much a surprise to the CCP playbook that they have been making one mistake after another, raising the issue of freedom in a way that even resonates in liberal democracies like mine, where we tend to take our freedom for granted. We're so honored to have with us two champions of Hong Kong democracy. His Eminence, Cardinal Zen, Bishop Emeritus of Hong Kong, and Arnold Chung, founding member of Demosisto, a youth political initiative formed after the umbrella movement in Hong Kong. They are literally taking time away from the protest to be here with us, and I really want to value their time. Personally, I find the Hong Kong protest to be profoundly hopeful. They have now defied all odds at day 126 and counting. So I'd like to have a very brief dialogue, and then I'd like to open it up to the audience because I know that probably all of you would like to learn from people on the front line of this emerging and ongoing fantastic and inspirational fight for freedom. So, Your Eminence, you have for a lifetime been an advocate for freedom, democracy, and human rights in Hong Kong, and been active throughout, including now. Could you share your thoughts on the current Hong Kong protests and the way that they are conducted and organized?
I live in Hong Kong for more than 70 years, so I feel really a citizen of the city. And we are being threatened of losing all our freedoms. And so, since many years, we try to voice our worries. And you should have admired all those rallies by 1 million and 2 million. But the government is not listening. And so finally, during the umbrella movement, the students came out. And recently, some other young people came out. They thought we may use some more energetic way to make our voice heard. But unfortunately, there is no hope we can be stronger than the other part, because the government is like a lion. Hong Kong is just like a small rabbit. So it's very worrying that the situation is going out of control, because the government, both Hong Kong and Beijing, they decided not to giving anything. And so what can we do? I mean, the majority of Hong Kong citizens, we are for peace, rationality, no violence. And so we are afraid that the violence is not the solution. But when you want to use some more energetic means, you are in the danger of going into the violence. And so these last few days, we have really big worries about our future. And I think the problem is not only from the government, and they are just after power, but I think the solution should come also from ourselves, because there is still some gap between the majority of the old people, the peaceful, and the young people who are more impatient. And I really hope that the future may be in a more deep dialogue among ourselves. And so to be really united, and then maybe we can put our demands more efficaciously to the government.
Thank you. I think one of the profound elements of the Hong Kong protests this time around is the massive involvement of young people. And I think that Arnold can tell us his perspective and share why the approach is the way it is, deliberately, not with a single primary contact, but in order to allow people from a different generation who are in, frankly, a desperate situation in Hong Kong now. So, Arnold?
Yes, I think, well, the whole conference have a theme of 1989, and I think it's remarkable that 1989 is the year right after the Tiananmen massacre that Hong Kong people come to the street in the number of millions, and then 30 years after that, we have another huge protest with millions of people coming on the street and fighting for our own freedom and fighting for the elements which are supposed in our promised one country, two systems, which are no longer there. But I want to add something, because I think the protest in Hong Kong is still going, and I think it was still going on for a long time, because many of the Hong Kong people actually thinking that this is actually the last chance we get to really defend our freedoms. We are very afraid that after this chance, if we have lose this battle for our own freedom and democracy, China will further clamp down on Hong Kong and will lose all of our autonomy. So actually this is a very big mentality within the people of Hong Kong that this might be our last chance. And people are fighting with all their means, and they do all their best to do it. And there are actually many reports that young protesters are actually drafting their last will and taking their last will on them before they took to the streets, because police brutality is going very high in Hong Kong. So I think this is what's happening in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is really on the crossroads. Rather, we can win this battle and then we could defend our freedom, or we could develop a democratic system which was promised and is not here, or our autonomy will further being clamped down.
Your Eminence, I know that you are an advocate of dialogue and coming to understandings and agreements. In this scenario, dealing with the government that we're talking about, how much confidence can we have that any agreement or contract or any promises made will ever be fulfilled?
I think when they promised the one country, two systems, we had reason to believe it may be sincere, because it's really to their advantage to keep the Hong Kong system as it was. But then little by little, we noticed that they go back to their promises. And the communist system is all based on power. So they are so mad about power. So when they are challenged on that, they may even forget their own advantages. They may be so silly to destroy the system of Hong Kong. And so we in Hong Kong, we are very educated people, so we don't believe in violence. But also because the violence may provoke the other part into madness. So we really hope they may understand some other kind of power. I hope the majority of the citizens who go for rally, you imagine under the sun of summer in Hong Kong. People walk for hours in hundreds of thousands and 1 million, 2 million. Sorry. I think they need to have their voice united, because we can chant slogans, but I think we need to reason, to show them that we are to be trusted. We are not for the destruction of our country, and that we are in no way in the possibility of doing that. And so our demands are reasonable, because a Hong Kong with the system of Hong Kong is really for the good of our country.
I agree. And for a headless protest movement such as this, maybe, Arnold, you could shed some light on, for the audience, about how the 5 demands came about.
Well,
and actually, if anybody doesn't know what the 5 demands are, maybe you should tell them.
Well, I don't go into the details right here, but actually, the movement starts with an extradition bill,
Sure.
which will allow Hong Kong people to be extradited to China, and then we thought that was unacceptable. And then, as the movement goes on, we add in demands of democracy, we add in demands of requesting the government to not politically persecute our protesters, so on and so forth. So I'm not going to details, but actually, to your question, how these 5 demands are coming from it. These demands is not decided by a particular organization or party. There are actually no major parties or organization leading the protest. These demands or these consensus are actually coming from the actions of the protesters. There's one night that protesters break into the Legislative Council building in Hong Kong, which marks another stage of our protest. And on that night, the protesters inside issue a statement. And in that statement, we come up with a consensus which the whole Hong Kong protesters agrees on, which is the 5 demands. And then we could hear the message of 5 demands, not one less, all over Hong Kong for the coming months. So I think there's a special characteristics of Hong Kong movement is that we don't have one single organization or platform which are leading it. Even veterans, even very experienced social activists are only facilitating the movement to happen and facilitating in the way which they are good at. There are people organizing huge scale protests. There are people planning on international campaigns. There are people planning on crowdfunding campaigns to put newspaper advertisement all over the world, and people are working in their own way to make the movement happen.
Well, this also happens in the wake of deteriorating freedoms in Hong Kong. So in many ways, the extradition law was the straw that broke the camel's back, I think, for the citizens. This subject deserves much more than 30 minutes, obviously. Just the tactics and the strategies employed by the protesters deserves its own session. But it's happening right now. It's so real and so profound, and it is courage in the face of a very, very, very strong bullying country. So I want to, unless one of you has more comments you want to make, I really want to throw it out to the audience so that we could have questions about the protests from people on the front line to help educate the world, because we don't get a glimpse of this very much. So we have the ball mic, the square ball mic, and we're going to toss it to whoever has a question. And please ask a question. Don't make a statement. Don't make a speech. Let as many people as possible ask questions. Thank you. I think you have to talk into that black circle.
Okay, I'm from mainland China. I was born and raised there, like for 20 years, my whole life were there. And I, like in the light of mutual understanding, I actually find like both sides will have different narratives of the incidents happening in Hong Kong. Like I know in the Hong Kong media, they portray like the violence was from the police, but in the mainland China, they are really portraying like the violence caused by the protester to make Hong Kong a really chaotic place. And so I want to ask, how do you comment on that? And also, they also say that there is actually a large majority, the silent majority, who are actually pro the Chinese communist, like really pro-China side, which they are not on the street to protest, but they are the ones who are suffering all the consequences by the protest. So I would also ask you, how do you comment on that? And second question is like, although like I don't really...
Let's just try with the first one first. Let's just do that. Okay, so if I understand his question, he is saying that he's from the mainland and they have very opposing information about what's happening in Hong Kong. So could you comment on the perspective from being in Hong Kong?
Well, I think this gentleman mentioned about silent majority, and in social movement, people get affected, right? But I think in Hong Kong, even there are confrontations. I won't say that there are no confrontations between the protesters and the police, but those confrontations are usually not targeted to ordinary civilians. They are only confrontation between the protesters and the police. And protesters may also target government properties, government buildings, but protesters don't target on other civilians. So in the sense that, well, maybe there's a part of the people here who are not speaking up about the issue, but mostly they are not affected. Protest goes on the weekend, and many people still go to work on weekdays. So this has happened for over 14 and 15 weeks, and it has been like that, and it will go on like that.
Thoughts, Your Eminence?
I lived all the time in Hong Kong, except 7 years between 89 and 96. Teaching in the seminaries in China, spending 6 months a year. So I can understand how the people under the totalitarian regime, they easily, maybe at the beginning, they resist to that brainwashing, but little by little, you know, the government is so powerful so that people may believe much of what they say and what they see on the news. And so surely there is a big distance between Hong Kong and the mainland. We are still enjoying many of the freedoms. You just imagine how we, every year we remember the Tiananmen Square. We have a big candlelight vigil. We can shout against the government. So I can understand the distance. It takes time for people who come out from China to understand. We have a lady professor in the University of Hong Kong. She explained how, you know, we must understand this difference of understanding. So there is no surprise that the people coming from China to Hong Kong, they find another word.
Or the people in the mainland. So is there a silent majority? I'm sorry, the question was, is there a silent majority of Hong Kong citizens that don't care about the issues? That was part 2 of his question.
Yeah, that's the question, yeah. I think Hong Kong people used to be formed by the refugees from China. So they were very happy to have this free word, but maybe they had some illusion because it was just a borrowed time and borrowed space. But little by little, the second generation, they never experienced real life under those times. And also they see the present in China also very different from immediately after the,
yes.
The liberation. And so, it's a, so, oh, no.
Just a coincidence,
It's
I'm sure.
So, I think those of the second generation, they find some difficulty in understanding the things which happen. And also because, Hong Kong has a legislation by which every day 150 persons can come from mainland. Now, the selection of people is in the hands of the Chinese government. So about this more than 20 years, you can understand that many of the new generation, they are of different mentality. And also because the relation between Hong Kong and China is more and more strict. So many people depend on China for living. And so they don't like such a disturbance to their way of life. And so I can understand, but what we treasure is our freedom. And to defend freedom, you may have to pay something, but actually it would be unwise for us to demand too much. And so during that long occupying the center, during the umbrella movement, it was too long. Now, that was a conspiracy on the government because they wanted it to be long, to annoy the people. And this time, it's also very dangerous now because the action the young people are taking are on the border of violence. And so the people are obviously against that. So I can understand the ill feeling in many people against this protest.
Arnold? Okay, so let's throw the ball. Right here. There's like 3 in a row, so.
Thank you. Yeah. I come from Mexico, and my question is, in Latin America, we're facing totalitarian regimes advancing frequently, and we have faced these kind of systems as something very unnatural to our culture. But right now, we have essentially in Venezuela and Nicaragua, people that it's opposing those regimes, and they are looking at Hong Kong as a very successful civil resistance fight. And my specific question is, what piece of advice could you say to them because you have been very successful in communicating to the people of Hong Kong, what you are doing, very precise causes, and the successes against one of the most powerful totalitarian systems in the world ever. Thank you.
I think that the summary of the question is really protest best practices.
I think,
and we have seen a lot of evolution between the umbrella movement and this one.
well, I think there's no best way to do the movement. I think, well, Hong Kong people, the protesters in Hong Kong are actually learning all over the world. On the 30th anniversary of the Baltic Way, we have the Hong Kong version of it. It was just an imitation, actually. It's nothing new, but we find this as a way to show our unity, show our solidarity, and we are also learning from different movements around the world. I think there are so many contexts everywhere, so I think it's difficult to say there's a one way out. But I think Hong Kong have been successful in adapting to what the government throws to us and learning what other countries have experienced in. So I think that's a key thing for the Hong Kong protest to sustain for a long time. Cardinal has mentioned on the umbrella movement, people may think, oh, it's too long and people are getting annoyed. So people are coming out only on the weekends, largely this time. So this
that's an
kind of
innovation.
learning,
Right.
this kind of evolution. And then people are getting adaptive. People will evaluate what they're doing on the previous week, and then they will suggest new tactics on the new week. And then people will even go to the protesting and apologize to the people getting affected on the next day of the protest. So I don't think there's a perfect way to do standing up against authoritarian regimes, but the way out is to being adaptive.
I think that is a profound characteristic of the current Hong Kong protest movement. It's a very dynamic and adaptive, and there have been so many different tactics taken by the authorities that the protesters are continually evolving. And I think that that is one characteristic of this protest movement. The lady sitting in front of you also had a question? Okay, and then there's the guy waving his hand. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Mia from Vietnam, and I have two questions for Mr. Arnold Chung. The first question is that we all know that the Hong Kong people have been demonstrating for more than 4 months, and it still not stops. But so my question is, do you have any strategies for Hong Kong people to continue their demonstration? And what if the government do not accept your demand? And the second question is, what is the role of political parties like Demosisto in the demonstration of Hong Kong?
I think it's a question for you.
Yeah, I know, but I didn't hear the first one.
Oh, okay. She asked, one part of her question was, how are the political parties involved in the protests? And the first part was, what is your strategy and what is your hoped outcome? And then I would love to get the Cardinal's view on what he thinks is an outcome.
Well,
for me, I don't think we can teach other people. We have to learn much. And that's why I have been to Vietnam. And 2 years ago, I came here to visit Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, to learn. And this time I'm coming old man and with hard hearing. I still want to learn because the situation is different. The communism is like the Catholic Church is always the same, but they can adopt different strategy. It depends on the different history, background of the people. We cannot teach other people. We may learn something. And so being a Catholic priest, I'm particularly concerned about the religious persecution. Now, I noticed that in the European countries, there is a deep root of faith, and also in Vietnam, and the bishops are very well united. They can resist. Unfortunately, in China, we are having a complete defeat.
Right.
And there are other reasons I will not mention this time.
Well, for the political party part, I think since the umbrella movement that political parties is not a major actor in the movement. It's mostly, it's all the people themselves. Even like social activist groups are finding difficulties in so-called leading or finding a role in this movement. So for political parties, it's extra difficult for them because there are even some, I would say, distrust between the really hardcore protesters and the political party. But actually, those legislators is also working hard inside the system for the extradition bill. Actually, the movement built up its momentum before the June, before the million large-scale protests take to the street. Actually, the legislature take months trying to block the bill to go, and then that's why there's a long period of time that we are building our momentum and that we are managed to organize such a large scale rally.
Okay, I know that people really want to know what the outcome is going to be, but I do really want to, time is up. So the guy that was waving his arm, I really want to give him a chance to ask his question.
Yes, hello. Konstantin Egetz from Russia. I work for Deutsche Welle, a German international broadcaster. I have two questions, one for Arnold, and it is about the deployment of PLA and all these kind of threatening tactics. We do know that such regimes feel that if it doesn't work, they have to kind of jack up the volume. Mm-hmm. So what do you think is the possibility of a full-on, full-scale assault by the Chinese military in Hong Kong? And my other question is to His Eminence. Eminence, it may be quite an awkward question, but for you, but knowing about the outreach that the Holy Father had towards Beijing with regard to changing the state of affairs with the Catholic Church, do you think that what happens in Hong Kong will have an impact on the way the Holy See thinks about China? Thank you.
So you start, because he's translating?
Well, yeah, maybe I'll
and we're all on borrowed
first,
time
yes.
now.
Very short. I think there's a sort of common understanding that the PLA will never go into Hong Kong. They will just station in the border.
It's a threat.
Yes, and the point is, if the PLA really charge into Hong Kong, then the one country, two system would declare officially over. Now it's like, it's still there, but people know that it's not there. But Chinese could still fool around in the world, say, oh, one country, two system is still working. And then that's what they're trying to do. So I think the PLA will have
and plus, everything they're doing is just an example to Taiwan about what one country, two systems will look like there. Your Eminence?
I don't think I can speak in the name of the Vatican. I am an outsider already, yeah? And since their objective is to please the Chinese government, to be able to carry on a dialogue, which is already near its end. They have already finished their operation. And you can notice that the Holy Father dares to reproach many people, but never said anything against the government of Beijing. So you can understand that they are not coming to our aid for Hong Kong.
So His Eminence is quite a prolific writer on this issue of the Vatican and China, so I recommend that you look up his writings. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you to the audience. Sorry it was such a race against time. It was a big subject. Thank you.